All right, guys. So this Drake UMG lawsuit is starting to take shape, and the whole thing is looking to be pretty damn fishy. Recently, we got some new updates with respect to the discovery phase, and while I'm not covering most of that in this video, I wanted to point out some really important things. First, what you guys need to know is that UMG as a business has been going through a significant transformation since the beginning of 2024. There have been a lot of layoffs, a lot of big promotions, employees have been quitting, and massive changes have been going on.
They're restructuring a lot. Like, these are not small changes.
Historically, the way things worked at UMG was you had Lucian Grange running the show at the top. Then on the East Coast, we had Republic Records, Def Jam, and Island Records, all of which had a bunch of smaller labels underneath them. But ultimately, Republic was the big player, and that was ran by Monty and Avery Lippman.
Then we got the West Coast labels.
On the West, we had IGA, which is Interscope, Geffen, and A&M, and then we had Capitol Music Group, which all had smaller labels underneath them, but ultimately Interscope was the big player, ran by John Janik.
And even though they fall under UMG, like the East Coast and the West Coast are in competition.
When it came down to which coast was more profitable, John Janik and Monty Lippman went up against each other for years to try and earn that number one spot.
In the corporate world, they're both climbers, right? So the goal at the end of the day is to take Lucian's seat.
With that said, Republic has always dominated, and a major reason for that is because they have Drake and Taylor Swift. In fact, every year besides 2020, John Janik of Interscope has lost to Monty Lippman of Republic. This is a huge deal when it comes to which guy ultimately takes over the reins when Lucian leaves. The board of directors look at a lot of different things, but performance metrics and profitability are at the top.
Based on performance metrics, Monty Lippman is clearly the man for the job.
And Lucian Grange said himself that he loves the internal competition that happens within the company because it ultimately makes people work even harder. The competition within our own company in signing and developing artists is no accident, it's by design. At the same time, our culture never lets our in-house competition become destructive. Our executives never forget that we're all part of the same UMG team.
So the culture at UMG of the East battling against the West, Monty against Janik, like that's by design and that's something they're proud of.
However, Lucian was about to drop a bomb, and that happened on February 2nd, 2024, when he announced that both John Janik and Monty Lippman were getting massive promotions and that a big restructure was coming.
Then it was just a month later where we learned exactly what these big changes were.
On March 12th, 2024, Lucian Grange handed full control of UMG's labels to two people, John Janik on the West Coast and Monty Lippman on the East Coast. Now on the West Coast, all the major labels, Interscope, Geffen, A&M, and Capitol, were merged into a single company called ICLG, with John Janik running the show. On the East Coast, the exact same thing happened. Def Jam, Island, and Republic were grouped together under one umbrella called Republic Corps, led by Monty Lippman.
So now it's even more competitive because both Monty and Janik, now they've got more responsibility and more power. So like now is really time to prove yourself.
And at this point, heads started to roll where massive layoffs came into effect. UMG had previously announced that because of this restructuring, they could save $270 million a year. These big changes also ruffled the feathers of some very heavy hitters. Michelle Jublier, who was the CEO of Capitol Music Group, didn't seem to like the idea of John Janik being her new boss, and she resigned the moment his promotion was announced. Then Arjan Prugel, who was the vice president of Capitol Records, also quit. Sydney McCabe, CEO of UMG in Nashville, also announced that she will be quitting, and that came just 5 days after the Monty and Janik promotion. Then we saw high-end executives who held various positions across the labels get laid off.
I'm not going to name all the people, but like these are high executive positions. Like these aren't just anybody. These guys got hefty salaries. Like big cuts are being made.
Anyways, on March 12th, all these changes take place. Janik and Lippman are now the kings of their respective coast, and what do you know, 10 days later, Kendrick fires his shot on the Like That record.
Motherfuck the big three. Nigga, it's just big me.
When it comes to Kendrick Lamar, he is one of John Janek's biggest stars on Interscope, dating back as far as Good Kid, Mad City. In fact, all of Kendrick's albums were released under Janek, and he was heavily involved in Kendrick's career. In the case of Drake, he was on the other side with Republic. Not only was he one of the main reasons for over a decade and why Janek struggled to clinch the number one spot, but Drake's contract was coming to an end, and the writing was on the wall that he might be leaving. For that reason, tensions were likely already pretty high between Monty Lippman and Drake.
And these were the ingredients that came together that made for a perfect storm.
Kendrick closed out his deal with TDE and Aftermath Interscope 2 years prior, with Mr. Morale being his last project. It was from that point forward where Kendrick was considered 100% independent under his own label, PG Lang.
It really seems like the Like That verse from Kendrick, that was an independent release.
However, all that was about to change as Drake took the bait, dropping Push-Ups on April 13th and Tailor Made on April 19th, and for some unknown reason, Kendrick, the guy that can allegedly whip up a diss track in no time flat, was completely ghost.
And now we know why that was.
It turns out the savior of hip-hop and all things culture wasn't about to involve himself in a rap battle without a new shiny deal in place with his good old pal John Janek at Interscope Records.
You guys do remember John, right? You know, the guy that got like the big promotion. He's like trying to be number one and shit. No? Kendrick knows him really good.
That's right. On April 27th, 2004, Kendrick put pen to paper and signed a deal with PG Lang and licensing through Interscope, and 3 days later, Euphoria dropped.
But don't tell no lie about me, and I won't tell truths about you.
So basically, the reason why it took the reincarnated version of Tupac 17 days to respond was because he was in cahoots with John Janek and Interscope, discussing the best path forward so that they could both reap the benefits from the moment. Before the beef, Kendrick was cold as ice, and the newly promoted John Janek was willing to do whatever it takes to not just bring Drake down, but to prove himself.
But this is where it gets extremely interesting.
Kendrick dropped 4 diss records in the beef against Drake: Euphoria, 616 in LA, Meet the Grams, and Not Like Us. After that, he dropped the GNX project, but this is the major difference. All 3 of the diss records that were added to DSPs were licensed directly from Kendrick Lamar to Interscope Records, but the GNX project was licensed from PG Lang to Interscope Records.
Why are the 3 diss tracks different?
That's probably why Drake's legal team is very eager to look into Kendrick Lamar's contract with Interscope, and that's probably why UMG has heavily redacted information from it.
And this is the smoking gun, right? Because that tells me that in that contract that he signed, those 3 diss tracks, there has to be something about the battle in the contract because those 3 records had a different agreement.
Remember in my breakdown of Drake's Iceman episode 2, where we focused heavily on the Pinocchio character, I brought up how in the Disney movie, a fox named Honest John leads Pinocchio into situations with massive promises, but it ultimately ends up being a trap.
Straight to the top. Why, I can see your name in lights. Lights 6 feet high.
And I said that Honest John the Fox is John Janek, and then Kendrick is Pinocchio. He's the puppet.
And this is one of the main reasons why Drake's legal team are looking into how much John Janek could benefit when it comes to bonuses and compensation. When you look at the specific people who are listed in discovery for this lawsuit, it's very clear that Drake's legal team are heavy on seeking documentation from Interscope. That's where the magic seemed to happen, and with the subpoena of Kojo, they are going to find that bots were used because that was part of what he did in marketing.
It's probably going to be pretty difficult for him to hide.
On the Republic side, it really seems like Drake is saying that they could have stopped the defamatory material, but why would they do that if Drake's contract is ending or he's possibly leaving anyways? The battle acted as a win-win for both sides. However, that Bag and Iceman episode 2 represents evidence that Drake seems to already have. In the middle of all that, we have Kendrick, who was really just a pawn or puppet in their game. What makes the whole thing all the more hypocritical is the fact that Kendrick went out of his way in the battle to separate himself from the industry.
And fuck the industry too. The industry can hate me, fuck them all. But the industry's cooked as I pick the carcass apart.
The more I've learned about this guy, like, he's nothing what he portrays to be, and that's what this lawsuit's gonna expose. Like, it's really gonna expose how fake he is.
Drake doesn't care about offending the culture of hip hop with this lawsuit because the lawsuit is going to expose that this whole thing was anything but hip hop.
Signal conversations where I hope they got double encryption. I hate to see the empire crumble on judges' convictions.